Hey, so my name is Major General Retired Brian Watson. I'm your president of Army Engineer Association, and I am thrilled by tonight's engineer rally point um, for a couple of reasons. There's are segments of our regiment that really uh, we don't fully understand just by our very nature. Um, and our divers and what they bring to the fight is absolutely one of those segments. We cannot do what we do without them, uh, and so I'm excited uh, that our divers are going to get a chance to maybe explain a little bit about the capabilities, the breadth of their missions, and then go to some real world examples where they are in the fight now, in some cases in contested space, um, bringing assured mobility to where it's needed for all services. I'm reading a book called New Ways of War, and it's opening my eyes as we think about what warfare is going to look like in the future. There are three things that I believe, not necessarily from the book. First is my prayer. My prayer is that it is going to be an away game. That's my prayer every day. Second, I think, is a principle that it's going to be contested from the very outset in ways we can't even imagine today. And so we've got to be ready. And then third is physics. The American way of war, which I don't think is going to change appreciably as a power projection platform, demands that we have assured mobility from the sea and then across any body of water, flowing or not, in order to achieve a position advantage against an enemy. And so that's what divers do for us, and that's why I'm really excited about today's rally point. I'm going to turn it over to the commander of 130th for some opening comments, and then we'll get started. Sir, over to you. I'm sorry, to the commandant, then over to the 130th. My commandant, my commandant.
Hey, sir, General Watson. Can I get a quick radio check, please?
You've got it clear.
All right. Hey, sir, thanks for that introduction, and thanks for your thoughts, and thanks again for being the force behind initiating this Rally Point series. It is of value to those who tune in. This is indeed part of a regiment that not all leaders, as 12 Alphas especially, and our senior NCOs have been exposed to before, and you need to. We're lucky tonight to have two organizations brief us on contemporary operations, one oriented towards the Pacific and our priority theater, and a commander that has two teams now that are engaged in daily competition activities. And truth be told, if he had 10 teams, he could probably put them all to work fully. And then to contrast that, we also have a team that went the other direction to the east and was recently involved in a very high-profile mission, extremely high-profile mission there in the Middle East in a very complex environment. They did fantastic work to those that know what they did. So with that, we want to use our time wisely. It's an honor. Jim Bolio, you're next.
Thanks, sir. Aloha, team. Really a pleasure to join you this afternoon / evening your time. So our dive detachments, they are critical for operations here in the Pacific AOR. They enable the USERPAC commander's focus on building joint interior lines to gain positional advantage for warfighting. The vast number of ports and continuous use of Army watercraft create a significant demand signal for Army divers here in the Pacific. I'm joined by Captain Andrew Thompson and Captain Spencer Jefferson, our two dive deck commanders that'll give some highlights of their operations over the past year and some of the upcoming operations that they'll be planning and participating in over the next 6 months. These aren't exhaustive lists by any means. For every one operation that Andrew and Spencer are going to discuss, there's 2 or 3 that aren't highlighted just for the sake of time. But bottom line, USERPAC just has a persistent need for dive capability in support of exercises and emerging requirements. Our sister services, our partner nations also seek out our diver support, as Andrew and Spencer will talk about. With that, I will turn it over to them.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Captain Spencer Jefferson, 569 Engineer Dive Detachment Commander here in Hawaii. We'll start by going over our mission, which is to conduct diving operations in a maritime environment to provide assured mobility and general engineering of the littoral infrastructure and sustain military operations in support of large-scale combat operations. Now, what does this mean? This means that we are heavily utilized to support missions across multiple theaters and specifically across the Pacific Island chains. Looking at both dive detachments and the statistics that we have over the last over the last year, we have over 600 dives across 10 different countries alongside both partner nations and sister services. And through our capabilities will be covered in the next slides, but because of our broad expertise and the amount of work that we're able to do, as you can see in both the first, second, and third island chains, there's no shortage of work in our AO. As you can see on the right side, there's various missions that we've conducted, and several of these we'll highlight in the future slides. I'll now pass it over to Captain Andrew Thompson for dive capabilities.
Good afternoon, Captain Andrew Thompson, 7th Engineer Dive Detachment Commander. The engineer dive field as a whole has about 150 divers and about 25 dive officers total. Our overall structure is comprised of 3 teams in Virginia and 2 in Hawaii. The teams, as mentioned, have about 25 divers per. To execute our operations, we're integrated within combat engineering, general engineering, and geospatial engineering in the respective mission sets listed on the slide. To accomplish these different tasks, we have both scuba diving, which allows us to go down to 100 feet of seawater, as well as surface supply diving or hard hat diving, which allow us to dive down to 190 feet of seawater. Throughout this process, we're integrated in all different forms and disciplines of engineering and accomplish this throughout the following missions that we'll discuss today. Next slide. To highlight recent operations, earlier this year, we had the opportunity to go to the Philippines as a part of the Pacific Pathways mission. So to provide some context, Pacific Pathways is a major initiative here in the Pacific Theater to integrate forces from the 25th Infantry Division, from JBLM, from Alaska and Hawaii, and the 130th into partnering with our allies, building relationships, providing humanitarian aid, disaster response, and increasing capacity throughout the Pacific. This year, in our opportunity to go to the Philippines, we're operating in the island of Bosco, about 150 miles from Taiwan, where we had the opportunity to conduct large-scale port opening and port clearance operations. During this mission, we worked directly alongside the Armed Forces Philippine Army Engineer Divers, where we built training capacity, shared lessons learned on how to utilize underwater demolition, hydraulic tools, and other construction equipment in the water to increase their ability to perform future humanitarian aid and disaster response efforts. With this, we were able to positively strain and test logistical means and systems to deploy across the Pacific, where we had the opportunity to move our equipment on the first non-U.S. flagged commercial vessel from Subic Bay up to Bosco. With this, the result of the mission was that we were able to remove over 712 cubic meters of material, increasing our ability and understanding of how to execute port opening and port clearance operations to create deeper channels for boats and vessels to come in the future. Following a participation in Pacific Partnership or Pacific Pathways, 7th Dive conducted underwater construction and partnership building as part of the Rim of the Pacific exercise. So the Rim of the Pacific is a biannual exercise that the U.S. Navy hosts. It's their largest multinational exercise held in Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam. Throughout the month-long mission and training, 7th Dive had the opportunity to work alongside 7 different partner nations to include New Zealand, Canada, Korea, Netherlands, and Mexico and Peru. Throughout this process, we trained on port damage repair, which is a critical component to conducting the port opening and port repair procedures, where we executed pile jacketing, pictured in the middle picture on the right. Through the process, we worked through 4 years of environmental permitting to get to the point to be able to execute the project in Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam, working alongside Naval Facilities Command and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to secure that respective permitting. Throughout this process, we were able to train over 32 divers from the 6 different countries and trained on the wide range of tasks in port construction tasks. Through this, we were able to develop our capacity to execute rapid port repair and develop invaluable training alongside our partners.
Other recent operations, specifically conducted by 569th, was hydrographic surveys on various islands supporting the logistics support vessel, LSVs, port-to-fort operations for 2 different exercises. During this time, we surveyed over 450 acres of ocean floor, including 4 ports, 6 anchorages, 10 beach landing areas, and 1 harbor channel. When talking dive capabilities, a lot of people are often surprised at us telling them that we're capable of doing hydrographic survey and sonar capabilities. And this is actually one of our top mission sets across the Pacific. And as we're looking at and thinking through the future fight and joint logistics over the shore operations, there is a dependency of the engineered dive detachments in the Pacific to enable these forward logistical operations, and determining which islands and across the 1,000 islands that are throughout the Pacific, which islands are capable of supporting which size vessels. And this will be critical information for future planners as we're looking at future combat operations. And so throughout these surveys, we're collecting key bathymetric intelligence that allows for these LSVs berthing operations and download of critical equipment and vehicles.
Hey, I just asked a question here, and for anybody who has a question, just type it in chat. So when you all go do these missions, particularly with the geospatial, and where's the repository? So when units are going into theater, where can they get the repository of the surveys, the hydrographic surveys that you guys have done?
Yes, sir. Great question. So the majority will be depositing and downloading that in the Red Eye system, and just so that way different various units can look at that, and planners can pull that up for reference as they're looking at which specific ports that we have surveyed.
Yeah, I've got one of the foremost geospatial experts. Chad, can you come off the net real quick? Can you address this real quick?
Yes, sir, that's true. It really, it's a challenge that is not 100% for each dive team and each geospatial planning cell, but Red Eye, JECOP, which is funded by the Corps of Engineers, is that joint location for geospatial hydro data. And then, but also, you know, if anybody ever needs hydro data, or their supporting unit that needs it, they can always start at the Army Geospatial Center or the geospatial planning cells at each ASCC.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this thing is so this is so important. It's not something that you all are doing. Yes, you're doing it for a particular mission, but it becomes part of our repository. So in many ways, it's a durable reconnaissance, and one that we're all going to need. Yeah, thanks, Chad.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to the next slide. So continue for our recent operations. We've had an existing relationship with the Defense POW and MIA Accounting Agency, or DPAA, for over the past 13 years now. Specifically in the past year, both detachments have supported them in underwater investigations, specifically in Fiji and Thailand, where we have identified potential recovery sites. Additionally, 569th conducted surface supply diving in Vietnam. These operations, yes, they provide valuable training to the divers, but also it has an existing meaningful purpose behind it as well, as we're identifying the remains and bringing closure to the families of service members who were killed or lost in the Vietnam War. We have the opportunity to tag team with them, and over 125 days provided the support of diving, and on the bottom through multiple hours of diving each day, and we're able to collect over 200 pieces of possible human remains. So this is an amazing mission that we have, and we continue to support throughout the years. I'll pass it back over to Ander for.
Yeah, thanks for being core to our ethos there.
So the Pacific Missile Range facility is a facility in Barking Sands, Kauai, that is operated and ran by the Navy. Specifically, the cable that, or the range that we work on is a system that's part of the Naval Facilities Command. So over the last 8 years or so, there's a range that supports submarine cables that allows for submarines departing Joint Base Pearl Harbor and going out into the Pacific Theater to validate and test all of their systems. In order to do this, they have a series of cables pictured here on this slide that allow them and provide sensor feedback to the overall training facility. So for the last 8 years, and specifically, our team got back last month. 7th Dive conducted over provided over 65 dives ranging from 10 feet down to 100 feet, conducting these inspections and repairs on critical cables that validate and ensure that the submarines are able to go out and conduct their required inspections. Through the course of these inspections over the last month, are able to provide the Navy and NAVFAC over cost savings of $8 million for the repair and maintenance of the degraded cables. This mission set allows the detachment to train on the emplacement of hardware on undersea cables, train many of its metal tasks, as well as train alongside the Navy and for the Navy in order to increase our partnership and capacity to support the Joint Force.
So moving on from recent operations going into future operations, coming up in November, we'll be conducting a salvage diver exercise. This will provide our basic divers the opportunity for hands-on salvage training that's critical to the future port damage repair operations and harbor clearance operations that'll be happening across the Pacific in future missions. So the key objectives during this salvage diver exercise will be consisting of sinking a salvage project, which is simulating a sunken vessel or obstacle. And then this teaches our junior divers on how to create a patch, how to apply the patch, and then dewater the vessel and float the project to the surface. So this is critical training for our young divers as we're moving forward, and just providing this realistic opportunity for as we continue to look at the future fight. I'll now pass it back over to Ander for Moassa Dam.
About 6 months ago, 7th Dive received a request from the Air Force located out of Misawa Air Force Air Base in Japan to facilitate the inspection and minor repairs and cleaning of 3 dam structures located on the air base. The Air Force identified that these respective structures haven't been inspected in over 30 years and have passed their life cycle for inspection and maintenance and provide critical drainage to prevent flooding on the airfield located at the airbase. This is a unique opportunity for us in the Pacific. Dams on a lot of the islands are pretty small, are very few and far between, as most of our focus is on port facilities. So with this, we jumped at the chance to work with the Air Force and for the Air Force at Misawa Air Base, as well as train on a unique type of infrastructure that we seldom get the chance to train on out here. And so we're looking forward to the chance to get out to Japan and execute these dam inspections for the Air Force. With this, we're planning on integrating the USACE district out of Japan in order to build our relationships and build the knowledge gap in terms of their knowledge base on dam inspections and maintaining these structures and ensure that it's done safely and within the correct procedures. And ultimately providing, our goal is to provide a framework for the Air Force to regularly inspect these in the future, provide a checklist with a task list of future improvements as well. The final upcoming operation that we have will be in Kwajalein later this year. So earlier in 2024, we had the opportunity to send a team down to Kwajalein to do some inspections with the Engineer Research Development Center on several of the ports and train on an hydrographic survey. During this opportunity, we built a relationship with the garrison and are working on developing a memorandum of understanding to work alongside the garrison in the future and provide some mutual support. With this, the garrison identified multiple facilities throughout their atoll and island chain that required some port construction and damage repair. So we saw this as an opportunity to train on these critical tasks, as well as train our divers as part of a deep blue training exercise. So with this, we'll be integrating our junior salvage divers and first class divers. So that's our E5 population and E6 population, into 2 weeks of strictly training and validating their ability to conduct high-risk diving operations and ability to respond to emergency response scenarios. Through this, we're able to validate their ability to deploy and operate independently to lead missions. As often, we treat them almost like platoon leaders and sending them out the door and plan missions independently. So this will validate our ability to do that and ensure and act almost like a NTC or CTC type rotation and validate them before they conduct other operations throughout the year. From there, we're working with the LSVs and the 8th STB to utilize Army watercraft to get down there and transport equipment and personnel, and then use that as a diving platform. So building interoperability within our own division. And then finally, looking at building the relationship with the U.S. Army Garrison Kwajalein by conducting both training and operational impacts through the repair of respective infrastructure sites that they've identified that need assistance throughout the port. So this will provide us the ability to train on some critical tasks that, as we look in the future, that we'll have to execute port damage repair and port opening, as well as providing the garrison with the necessary support. Pending any questions, I'll at this point hand it over to Captain Zeal Cho.
Yeah, I just have one question, and I should know this answer, but I don't. How much of our dive structure is in the reserve component?
None of it. It's all
None.
active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just like we need to better understand all the capabilities that are in the reserve component is going to absolutely need this niche capability in the active component. It's unlike any of our other capabilities where all of it resides in the active. And so it just goes back to how important this is, that people understand your capabilities and then the missions that you're on now and how they can leverage that expertise when the time comes.
General Watson, sir, Colonel Kaluch here.
Yeah.
About 25, 30 years ago, the field did have reserve component divers.
Yes.
It did not work out. They were unable to achieve and maintain qualifications and readiness. So they stood down. It was about 1995 or so.
Yeah. Steve, I thought I remembered that we had some, but I've lost the bubble on it. So, okay, good. Okay, any other questions? We'll pause here before we go into a current operation on JLOTs. Okay, let's go ahead and continue.
Yeah, hey, Sir Rondeberry, one
Yeah,
question. Back when you had a 950-man battalion in a division, you had 4 divers. Back in those days, it was a 12B with an ASI-J ASI that identified your scuba divers, and in a
Right.
separate company, you had 2. When you needed diver support at the division and the brigade level, there was not time to go back and coordinate with a unit far away to do things. How do you support a division with what they need in diver support with both the bridge company, recon, and those types of missions that those 12BJs used to support? And really, as a matter of fact, the most critical mission was pulling dead bodies out of 113s when they used to sink trying to swim them. And we did that on 2 occasions, both when I commanded the 518th in Panama and the 2nd Engineers in Korea.
Yeah, Ron, it's a great question. So maybe Brigade Commander Jim, can you maybe highlight how much are we working to make sure that the divers and their expertise is understood down inside divisions, and that we do have sort of a, through our engineer brigades, a quick link. Most of you are linked into the corps. We'll have 2 brigades that are supporting divisions. But how do you see that as a senior leader, making sure that that link is and our time to response is shortened?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. There's definitely a gap there. And I don't think that the dive capabilities are completely understood if we were to take a look at the division divisions writ large across the Army. We have the unique position where we were co-located with 25th ID. And so we have the ability to support them and support, depending upon what their missions are in theater, support them directly. But, as a theater level asset, I will just say that the dive detachments, they do and are required to respond quickly to potential priority missions that emerge. So they're not necessarily on a PTDO mission or anything like that, but a recent example was an emergent requirement that required them to deploy within about 7 days, 5 to 7 days, to do a dive assessment in theater. So they do have that responsiveness. But I do think there is a potential gap across some divisions. Like I said, we have the ability to integrate here with 25th ID, and we're doing that right now in their warfighter, where we are able to communicate directly some of the capabilities that the divers have, let's say for wet gap crossing. But I don't think it's fully understood across the division structures writ large. Over.
Yeah, Jim, so I agree with you. And we got Black Diamond 5 is going to give us a little bit recent and how they've cut that to, very short time to support a tactical unit. But I think we are almost doing a better job advertising to the other services the capability than down inside our own combined arms teams. Just as a thought piece. Black Diamond 5. Major McGuire. All right, he was up on chat, and we'll
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes, sir.
All right, sorry, I was on my phone and it didn't switch over. All
I
right,
know
so
it's the thumbs. You can blame it
Yeah.
on the thumbs.
yes, sir. So yes, I see Major Cox is saying right there. So yeah, 1st Cav Division came out with a request to 20th Engineer Brigade for dive support for their wet gap crossing, and that was one of the things that we had to address was the actual capability that we were bringing. So it would be more for recovery operations, like I forget what the gentleman's name was earlier. That if we were on standby to recover any bodies if there was a vehicle that sank, because there would be no way we'd be able to recover an M1A2. But advertising that capability across the divisions, I don't think we're doing that right now, and that's possibly something that we should brief whenever there's any upcoming wet gap crossings of really the capability that divers can provide as more of a safety. But Captain Johnson's going to talk about littoral zone when he comes up later. Any questions?
Yeah, no, perfect.
All right, good evening, everyone, team. My name is Captain Deal Cho. I'm the commander for the 86th Dive Detachment at Fort Eustis, Virginia. I'm here today with Captain Jared Johnson, the Alpha 169 commander in Panama City, Florida. Today, we're here to talk about a recent experience we had as divers supporting the Gaza humanitarian aid mission known as Operation Neptune Solace. So for some background information, Operation Neptune Solace was a joint logistics over the shore operation with the purpose of delivering as much humanitarian aid to the Palestinians living in Gaza in as short time as possible. So the Trident Pier was operational for 22 days and successfully delivered over 24 million pounds of humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. For operational context, we worked in 2 areas. The first was the Joint Operations Area, known as the JOA. This was a denied environment with GPS jamming, with security in place on the shore from the Israeli Defense Force due to the no boots on ground limitation, as well as the Israeli Naval Force, the INF, conducting cordon operations from the water prior to entering into the JOA. The Port of Ashdod was the second place where we worked. That was referred to as Safe Haven. That's where we did the majority of our maintenance and repairs on the Trident Pier prior to stab operations in the JOA. This operation involved a joint task force comprising of U.S. Army watercraft from the 7th Transportation Brigade, U.S. Navy vessels, and locally contracted tugboats and support vessels, as well as was an international effort from support from the Royal Fleet Auxiliary from the United Kingdom and vessels from France. Initial notification of the deployment didn't include the 86th Dive Detachment. I know we kind of spoke on it earlier as to increasing our ability to communicate what we can do across the force. And we saw that with Operation Neptune Solace. However, eventually we deployed OPCON to the 7th TBX with our Tier 3 capability and conducted underwater welding, ship's husbandry, salvage, and hydrographic surveys between April of 2024 to August of 2024. So from our internal AAR, we consolidated 3 points that we really wanted to share across the engineer regiment. The first is that a Tier 3 capability be added to the JLOTS task organizations for future operations. In this context, the tiers refer to the size of the dive element that we're supporting. Tier 1 is a small scuba side of 4 to 7 individuals that's able to do visual inspections on ports and vessels. Tier 2 is a 18 to 14 person dive detachment that conducts this light salvage. And for us, a Tier 3 deployment capability consists of our full 25 person detachment to conduct light, medium, and heavy salvage. And for us, in context, medium salvage is considered 10 to 75 tons, and heavy salvage is anything over 75 tons. So for this, we identified a gap between the joint publication regarding joint logistics over the shore and our current Army doctrine for our ATP 3-34.84, the multi-service tactics, techniques, and procedures for military diving. What we found in the joint publication was that Army divers are cited along with Navy Underwater Construction Team, UCT divers, as conducting the initial setup and maintenance of offshore petroleum discharge systems in JLOTS operations. However, the recent revised edition of our multi-service TTPs of military diving was revised in 2023 and highlights a lot more capabilities that Army divers, as well as Navy UCT divers, can do to help on logistics over the shore. So due to that gap, as well as recent JLOTS operations, is one of the reasons why we believe the 86 was initially left off of the request for forces. Recent operations include Operation Talisman Sabre in Australia, as well as local training at Fort Story, Virginia, which is close to Fort Eustis. And that's where 11th Battalion and the 7th Brigade trains their Trident Pier stabbing operations. When we look at Operation Talisman Sabre in Australia, the 86th Dive Detachment actually worked in conjunction with the 7th Dive at the time to support with hydrographic surveys, and the 86th deployed a small Tier 1 scuba side that was able to conduct light ships husbandry as well as vessel inspections. But at that time, we did not utilize any additional asset to showcase our abilities. So that's been the consistent trend of how us and FORSCOM have been supporting JLOTS. Eventually, with the help of our battalion XO, Major McGuire, and the commander on the ground at the time, Captain Johnson, we embedded planners at every echelon to further advocate for the capabilities to allow 86 to deploy as enablers to support the 7th Transportation Brigade. Eventually, that worked, and we played a big role in maintaining the force to be operational for 22 days and successfully deliver that humanitarian aid. So one of our lessons that we wanted to share across the regiment is we should continuously deploy our 25-person team to conduct those light, medium, and heavy salvage capabilities across the force. The second lesson that we wanted to share was regarding underwater welding. So for Army divers, this is one of, I think, our coolest capabilities. So for what we found in Operation Neptune Solace was the time it took from the initial notification of a vessel taking on water that needs immediate repair to splashing divers with a welding side to actually conduct the repair took anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. And this is operating within the JOA from moving from vessel to vessel. What we found was our equipment was stored on the side of an LMSR Benavidez, which is this big Navy vessel, to coordinate the vessel movement from the LMSR to the vessel that's taking on water, crane our welder down along with our O2 bottles and our welding leads and our dive side took anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. And we foresee that in the future, we think that we can greatly reduce that time. One, by decreasing the size of the welder that we have, maybe something more operable that we can hand carry, as well as the O2 bottles. And we're thinking about maybe acquiring underwater battery powered tools in order to take away the paint on the hull of vessels prior to striking a weld. So these things that we currently have in terms of equipment are big and bulky. And we found that in Gaza, we needed to be light and expedient. And that's something that we pride ourselves in divers and our ability to get out the door. But to get from notification of a vessel taking on water to splashing divers to help is something that we think we can improve. The second is training in more realistic conditions. So for underwater welding, because it is so dangerous, we train in controlled environments. So we initially train at the Naval Diving and Salvage Training Center in Panama City Beach in a enclosed 30-foot tank. And even when we operate in missions, we're protected from the wave actions from either floating breakwaters or metal breakwaters. And the intent of the breakwater is to prevent the wave action that can vary from 5 feet to 15 feet from affecting the diver. Because it is inherently difficult to maintain stability within the water column to conduct that weld, we oftentimes find the most effective way to protect that diver. However, in Gaza, we were asked to weld in open water conditions, and we believe that this may be foreshadowing future operations for Army divers. So for us, there was no floating breakwater. There was no metal breakwater. There was nothing that we could do inherently to protect the diver from the wave action. So we decided that there are ways to develop our own TTPs. There are equipment that commercial divers use to include magnetized bear cloths and utilizing a line technique to find ways and creative solutions to stabilizing divers in the water column to conduct future underwater welding, and maybe becoming more or less risk averse when it comes to training on underwater welding, because it is something that we may be asked to do again in the future. So at this time, for the last bullet, I'm going to hand it over to Captain Jared Johnson. So as I previously introduced him, he's the Alpha 169 commander in Panama City Beach, Florida. Their task is to train the next Army divers as well as diving officers, as well as find training opportunities for FORSCOM and USERPAC divers. So Captain Johnson, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, Dill, you may have to go ahead and talk to the last point.
Yes, sir. So for the last point is what we identified was the need to train our divers in the littoral zones. So when we look at the tasks that we were requested to do in Operation Neptune Solace is clear a mobility corridor for the 7th Transportation Brigade Army watercraft prior to stabbing operations. So for that, we conducted a hydrographic survey to identify any hazards in the water. What we found was that thankfully, we did not find any explosive hazards in the littorals prior to stabbing operations. But had we found an explosive hazard, we do not inherently have the capability to properly identify and neutralize those hazards. It's a task that we're currently asked to support with Operation Spartan Shield in Kuwait. With that, we conduct our anti-terrorism force protection swims to identify any sort of explosive hazard or physical hazard to vessels coming into theater. For that, our current TTPs include splashing a scuba diver to identify on the hull of vessels if there is anything that may look potentially dangerous, without any formal training on what those explosive hazards are. This is a task that not only Army divers are facing, but also the Marine EOD divers as well, with their ability to I see the question in the chat, or the comment in the chat, but with the Marine Corps divers.
Hey, Deal. Sorry to interrupt. We just got an internet crash over here. Can you hear me all right now?
Yeah, I'll hand it over to you. I'll just explaining kind of the context of why we were asked to do it, and then I'll hand it over to you for the rest.
Sounds good. All right, so apologies, the internet at the NDSTC just went down. But good evening and thanks for having me, Captain Jared Johnson. So I'm current Alpha 169 commander, and I was the former 86th commander on the ground for the humanitarian mission in Gaza. And I'd like to yield my time tonight to talk about one mission in particular, which was the Leon mission that we were asked to do in conjunction to our beach reconnaissance survey. So if you haven't heard the term Leon before, it stands for Littoral Explosive Ordnance Neutralization. And it basically describes the process of proofing for explosives near shore, so both in and out of the water. And so the 86th recently got to experience firsthand that there's a validated need to clear and proof these lanes, not only for JLOTs, but for SPODs in the future fight. And the Army divers are going to be asked to perform this mission, whether or not we're equipped and capable to handle it. And this shortfall has been identified by the DoD for a few years now, but there's still not a definitive way forward. And there is not enough DoD assets to accomplish this mission across a geographically dispersed theater like the Pacific. So the first stab at a solution was through the Marine Corps Leon program at Eglin Air Force Base. And the program was designed to teach the EOD techs from the Marine Corps basic diving techniques, as well as identifying underwater explosives and disarming. But the standing issue with the current Leon program is that the Marine Corps EOD is historically a small community to start with. And then you couple that with the attrition of a school like dive school, and you produce a throughput issue. So the school was originally designed to make one Leon platoon per division size element, but since its inception in 2021, they've only been able to make a single platoon, and they're struggling currently to keep it populated. So the question being asked right now is, how are we as the Army, or more specifically the Engineer Regiment, going to close this capability gap? And can we do it with a functional training course and equipment change, and without changing our organizational structure drastically? And we've had discussions over the past year with Navy EOD, Marine EOD, Army 12 Deltas, as well as the USERPAC EOD cell. And we've identified a couple possible solutions for this gap. So the first of the solutions is small changes to our current engineer dive team's equipment, as well as adding a functional Leon training course. We could provide the Army with the capability to recognize explosives in the littoral waterways while we're already in theater providing hydro surveys for port openings and JLOTs. And another tangent of that solution involves sending our Army EOD techs, 89 Deltas, through the Leon program with the Marine Corps, and then integrating them in with the dive teams in order to provide that capability and provide soldiers that have more of an in-depth knowledge of the explosive hazards. And currently the Leon program is being reworked at Eglin, and we have an opportunity to voice an interest in the inclusion of 12 Deltas in order to grow that Leon capability within the Army. And alternatively, we could stand up an underwater Yoka course internal to the regiment that would have a similar curriculum and accomplish the same end state. But my big takeaway with the Leon is that the Army is going to experience this capability gap in the next fight, and we could get ahead of closing this gap by addressing it now. And I think with the addition of the functional training and a small modification of equipment, we could help meet the requirement to support joint logistics and SPODs with littoral proofing. But I could continue to dive into this for the next hour, but I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions, and hopefully this was enough information to generate a little discussion.
Yeah, Jared, so both of you, Dio, you and Jared, great. You just go back to their lessons learned. Fantastic lessons. I mean, they're not down in the TTP. These are things that are regimental issues. One, we've got to get, people have to understand the tiering system. Dio, you brought up, we had a gap in doctrine. Now we probably have a gap in people understanding the doctrine that we've modified. Okay, so I think, that's really, really important. Second, uh, divers, we've got to come up with a TTP, and, you know, I saw Sean, Dr. Sean Halley came on. If this is a requirement, then we've got to go out there and look at what is the current state-of-the-art stabilization for welding underwater and inside the water column. And then we gotta train like a fight, right? That's your point. And then the last thing, you guys hit on it. There has to be a debate, and you know, I kick this over to the Commandant and Dr. Howley. Is the regiment's role going to expand? Certainly, I think the requirement is, but is this now a Army support to other services issue that then, once we get the joint engineer group to say, yep, this is an Army service support to other services, then the things that you guys are advocating, attending courses, all that really becomes easier. But we've got to start with, you know, getting the senior leaders in the Pentagon really to say that, yep, there is a requirement, and this is an expectation that the Army is going to provide this. My Commandant, any comments?
Hey, sir, thanks. And I'll say some words and I'll pass it to Doc Halley. He'll probably do some cleanup for me. But we're on Zoom here, so I'll just talk in generalities, right? So Captain Johnson, this is great stuff. And to the previous detachment commander, I was getting reports on your activities, really impressive stuff and some really tough conditions. So a lot of respect for you guys. So you said the magic word starting with G near the end of your pitch, gap. Sounds like you have a gap. You need to communicate that gap. Actually, you work through the 1st Engineer Brigade and communicate that up here. And then if the Colonel Bolios and Colonel Shields of the world see a similar gap, they can communicate that also to the Army. And that's a powerful kind of statement right there. There's a material gap and a capability gap. And how we attack that, there's myriad ways and options we can go through with, you know, through .mil PF. So not first heard. I'm familiar with Leon. I've interacted with Marines about Leon. What I'm impressed about, Captain Johnson, is that you didn't just go right to kit and equipment. You talked about different options that the Army could have to face this gap. I want to keep it. I don't want to go any more to that gap itself. But Doc Halley, any cleanup on my words?
Hey, sir, great point and great follow up. Yeah, it really drives at the gap. And then what we have to do is take that to a requirement. And that requirement, given it's an Army requirement, but the focus, for example, the repairs, we can take that to a requirement across the other services, primarily on the Navy side, which helps us when we go in front of the Army to help fill that gap with a specialized kit, set, or outfit. So I really appreciate the dialogue and appreciate all the services that lay their hands to help make this mission happen. So very, very impressed with the dialogue tonight. Over.
Hey, Doc and General, 1 second. So for Captain Johnson, you know, Master Sergeant Knipe is, you know, the dive soup here at the school, who I'm sure you know, well known and respected here. And he's your guy that if he's not fully informed about what you see here, to please do so as soon as possible. Thanks.
Yes, sir. And just to comment on that real quick, me and Master Sergeant Knipe speak daily, and he's reviewing a white paper that I'm going to be putting out for the Leon gap shortly, sir.
So what I'd like to do is maybe open it up if there are any other questions before I ask the senior leaders to kind of close this out. Any questions for the group? Okay, seeing none. Commander 130th, Jim, over to you, sir.
Sir, nothing further from our end. We appreciate the opportunity to share in some of the missions and opportunities we've had to employ our dive capabilities out here in the Pacific. I look forward to some continued dialogue over the next few months on where we can also contribute across the regiment. Over.
Okay.
Hey, sir, Roddenberry again. Real quick, you know, one way of closing part of this gap is, you know, when you had the ASI Juliet 12Bs, they were not full-blown divers. They didn't have the hard hat. They didn't have the welding. they gave you the capability that you just needed in the division and the separate company. You know, going back to just that 12BJ, they were your recon people in your S3 shop anyway, so they were not additional people that you needed to put in the division, but they had that 4-week course. And let me tell you, there was a high attrition rate. It was about 50%, but you learned right away that you didn't send the back sink guy in the mess hall to diving school. He had to be a physical fit guy, but they only had the training that they needed for that job. And it was really, whether it's demolitions or whatever, 12Bs have got those skills already. The ASI just made them scuba divers, and they don't need to be actually in the diver community, but they have the ASI Juliet that filled that gap in the division.
Yeah, Ron, I think it's worth the school considering as we think about, how we can project other capabilities down inside our division. So I appreciate the perspective on that because, I do recall those days. Okay, Command Sergeant Major Plummer, regimental, sir.
Yes, sir. Thanks. I really appreciate the rundown. Great to hear some of our niche capabilities being publicized for folks that may not know about it. I can tell you, Master Sergeant Knipe and I, we talk often and frequently about diving and what we can do. So he's tied in very well with the community, and we're absolutely looking at a lot of these lessons learned. Thank you all for what you do for the regiment, and I'll turn that back over to you, sir.
Yeah, Sergeant Major, have you put your hard hat on yet and taken a plunge?
I have not. I went out to
Okay, guys, just stop it right there. Okay.
Roger that.
My Commandant.
Hey, sir, again, we're on Zoom here, straight on class. Everything we said is all good. I would just say very basically that different parts of our regiment have not been neglected, but they haven't gotten a lot of love consistently when it comes to their kit. And so the divers, amongst others of our kind of lower density specialties, are getting some attention this year to make sure they have what they need for now and the future. So that's my pledge. And that's what we're going after. Thank you so much, sir.
Hey, Steve, thanks. So look, I'm convinced that the gap is going to grow. I'm convinced that it's going to be an away game. I told you that's my prayer. I'm convinced it's going to be contested from the very beginning, and ports are going to be essential. The littorals are going to be essential. Waterways are going to be essential to the way of war. And our ability to assure mobility through those depends a lot on our dive community. And if you haven't gone to the dive school, you need to go and just go visit them. I did, and it was my honor to take my plunge, and I have it. And just so the divers see, I still carry it around. And because this is not the I love me room, it's the I love them room, and I love me some Army divers. Thanks for everybody attending tonight, and this will be hung on the web. For the dive community, I would just encourage you, there's some great lessons, some things that I think are worthy of putting in an engineer publication. I would encourage you to put an article together for Army Engineer Magazine. Remember, we got 10 copies that go to every single battalion, every brigade, every district across all composts. And so if you want to get a professional dialogue about this topic, that's a way to do it. And we'll be happy to support you in doing that. Okay, that's it for tonight. Can't wait to see you guys next rally point. Jim, nice job tonight, and lead to serve.